Everybody, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, since we don't have the banner that has the four-way test, I don't want anybody to have to repeat it from memory. So I will lead us in the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. 1, is it the truth?
Is it the truth?
2, is it fair to all
concerned?
3,
Will it build goodwill and better
friendships? 4, will it be beneficial
to all concerned?
And if we only had the politicians, we should probably send them all a copy of this. Anyway, but c'est la vie. We do the best we can with what we got to work with. All right, now moving along, we have guests Elliot and Samantha. Samantha, I take it you're probably related to the. You all right?
Yeah, those would be my parents.
Sorry. Actually admitting that, huh?
Bring your children to Rotary today. That's good. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Well, it's very timely for her. She's, well, Samantha works for UCLA and she just completed her master's at USC.
That's interesting.
Go Trojans.
So she roots for whichever football team has a better tailgate.
So Jonathan, how much did you and Laurie have to pay to get her into USC?
When's their court?
I do not recall.
A loaded question
At least you're not pleading the fifth.
Yeah, that's reserved for police officers. Okay. Okay. Now, oh, sorry, Steve. Steve's a retired police officer from the city of Tustin.
You're just adding the fines on, aren't you, Fred?
Oh, you know,
That's right.
I try to rack everything up at once. Okay, look, here's my problem today is I am moving to Northern California, which I'm actually driving tomorrow. And if you look out there, you see a U-Haul. And if you see behind the U-Haul, you see a whole bunch of stuff. And I have 2 guys helping me load that stuff. And we're kind of on a time budget because we need to get done before dusk. And it's smoky outside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the meeting. And then I'm going to turn it over to Richard, who will introduce our speaker. And then I'm going to sign off. And then Garry will be the acting president for the rest of the meeting. So that's what we're going to do. Okay.
Thanks, Brad.
Anybody have any announcements?
Yeah, just a quick one.
Yeah.
We have the district party on the 15th at 6 o'clock. If you want to link in and see what's going on with the district. So that's the thing for December.
The social, and that's
Right.
That's December the 10th, I want to say.
15th.
15th.
I've been cooking.
On my calendar, it says we have our board meeting that day. 15th? No, I don't.
Ah, well,
No, I'm wrong. No, that's wrong. The board meeting is on the 10th, which is the
Okay.
meeting, the Riley meeting day.
Yeah, I have.
Never mind.
I have.
Laurie,
6 o'clock on Tuesday, the 6th, the 15th.
okay, Laurie, you have an announcement.
Yes, I'll do quickly a few. We are going to once again deliver meals to the seniors on December 18th, which is a Friday, which is their regular date. We have several Rotarians that will be helping that day. Just yesterday, Tony sent out an email to us asking if we would maybe help them. They moved 2 weeks to Wednesday because of the holidays on the 23rd and the 30th. And a few Rotarians have already signed up, so that's really good. Also, we had, the board had okayed for us to adopt 2 families from the Boys and Girls Club with a budget of $750, I'm thinking is correct. I received the list. I actually started shopping like the next day. One family is a single father with 2 children. I've almost completed their list. The other family is a family of 7 parents and 5 children. I'm having a hard time navigating that list. I know most of it, and I've reached out to Jamie to help And once I get that information, I'll move forward to know that I might be sending something out that if anybody wants to add, so we can maybe complete the whole list that's beyond that 750 that we've allocated completely for both families, not each. I'll be doing that. So that's in the works. Also, I sent out an email about that Foothill High School Interact is participating in a fundraiser for the OC Rescue Mission this Saturday at Fruta. I think it's a boba place. And they'll be there. I'm gonna go, they asked me to please come out and see them since I haven't had the chance to see the interactor. So I'll be there. And then my last thing is that usually Miss Tustin Scholarship holds their Mr. Tustin contest in November. Since the pandemic, they're not able to do that. So they are selling Mr. Tustin calendars. And of course, our Johnny Johnson, who was the first Mr. Tustin, will be one of those months. I don't know. So those are available online. Probably if you looked under Miss Tustin Scholarship, and they're $40. So anyway, that's what I had to say. Thank you.
Okay, is Johnny posing in a Speedo?
I don't know. You'll have to buy the calendar and find out.
Okay, well, good to know. Okay. any
Real quick
other
question for
announcements?
Laurie.
Any other announcements?
Yeah, I have a few announcements if I could with upcoming programs, if
Okay,
that's
great.
okay.
Thank you.
So next Thursday, December 10th, Mark Elliott will be doing Student of the Quarter. On Thursday, December 17th, we will again have the American Red Cross, but this time they'll be talking about disaster preparedness. We won't have meetings on the 24th or the 31st, but coming up on Thursday, January 7th, James Haas will be doing a program on Corazon de Vida. And that's what we've got brewing for the next month or so.
Oh, I have a
believe
question.
we have a board meeting on the Tuesday, the 8th, next Tuesday.
If that's the day we're supposed to have it, we'll have it.
It's on my calendar on the 10th, which is Thursday, but should it be on Tuesday?
I think it's Tuesday.
We normally do them Tuesday.
It's
Yeah.
the second Tuesday of the month, so it'll be the 8th. So check the calendar. Be sure to send out a reminder to everybody so I don't forget.
Okay, so it's good on Tuesday. Okay.
Tuesday.
Okay, now, one other thing, on the money that we pledged for the X-ray equipment in Bolivia, when do we have to get that money in, Dick? If you know.
We can hold on to the money until the grant's approved. They're just getting pledges now.
Okay,
for
so the
the,
donors, all of us that donated money, just hang on to it.
We just hang on to it. We can give it to Roger to hang on to. However it works for you, just don't forget you pledged.
Right.
And, if you're going to hang on to it yourself, but there's no need to send any money until Fresno and Bolivia have their stuff together and have the grant submitted for approval to RI. And then when it's funded, when it's approved by RI, it can be funded. And then they'll be coming back to the clubs that are supporting it and asking for them to step up with their contribution.
Okay, sounds good, Dick. All right. Well, without further ado, and we've got, Dick, were you going to present the full slate this meeting, or was it going to be next
Well,
meeting?
the slate's already gone out.
Oh, that's
It went
right.
out by message, and it's open until the 10th for any nominations from the floor, at
Okay.
which time the nominations will be closed, and we will have a vote by email
If we need one.
following the 10th.
Okay, good. All right, everything's under control. Okay, now I will turn it over to Richard Rubin, who will introduce our speaker, and I will be saying goodbye. And I'm sorry that I'm going to miss your talk, because certainly I'm interested in justice. I've been practicing law for 50 years. I've never experienced it. So I do criminal defense. So when you have
That's
Republican
the reason
judges,
why.
you can forget about justice. But anyway, I will leave my partisan politics at the door and
Thank you.
turn over to Richard. Richard, it's all yours.
All right.
Thanks. So our program today is the Equal Justice Initiative based in Montgomery, Alabama. They're committed to ending mass incarceration and excessive punishment in the United States, to challenging racial and economic injustice, and to protecting basic human rights for the most vulnerable people in American society. EJI challenges poverty and racial injustice, advocates for equal treatment in the criminal justice system, and creates hope for marginalized communities. EJI founded the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, informally known as the National Lynching Memorial, a national memorial to commemorate the Black victims of lynching in the United States. You might have seen the story about the National Lynching Memorial on CBS News 60 Minutes. If you haven't seen it, it's available on YouTube. That opened in downtown Montgomery, Alabama on April 26, 2018. Our presenter is Elliot Spillers, EJI Project Manager. Elliot obtained a BS in Commerce and Business Management in 2016 from the University of Alabama, a YWCA Central Alabama Social Justice AmeriCorps member in Birmingham. He coordinated social justice programs for high school students, navigating the role of heritage, culture, and racial identity in adolescent development. Coming to us from Montgomery, Alabama, Elliot Spillers. Nice to have you here with us.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I am thankful to be with you all today, just to create space to talk about the work that we do, and then also to answer any questions you all have about our organization or anything else that I've raised during the discussion. As an overview, I think it'll be helpful if I just gave some context about EJI and our work. And then afterwards, if there is time, we can, have a bit of a Q&A. Again, I'm a project manager at EJI. I came here about 2 years ago after an AmeriCorps year of service. And I came here after having read Just Mercy, which likely many of you have read. And then specifically my role when I first came on EJI was as a Justice Fellow. Our Justice Fellowship is for 2 years for recent college graduates who want to engage with our legal work and our historical work as well. And I was tasked with helping to actually, get our National Memorial for Peace and Justice, the Legacy Museum from Enslavement to Mass Incarceration open about 2 years ago. And so I'm very thankful for that opportunity and having had the experience that I did to engage with all of the work to develop these 2 historical sites, which I hope you all one day visit post-COVID. And my role now primarily works to support our racial justice efforts, which I'll get into later on, through our Community Remembrance Project. So our work really began in 1989 as the Alabama Capital Representation Resource Center. At the time, there were a quarter of executions happening in Alabama nationally, from the national scope. And that really is what prompted Attorney Stevenson to move from Georgia to Alabama to begin the work here. At the time of our early founding, there are really 3 complicated factors that highlighted the reason why Attorney Stevenson moved from Georgia to Alabama to represent clients on death row. One of those reasons is because at the time, and even still today, Alabama does not have a statewide, state-funded public defender system. So whereas most states allocate resources and funding for criminal defendants who, for whatever reason, cannot afford representation at trial, Alabama does not have that infrastructure. What we do have instead is the system known as appointed counsel, where essentially attorneys are given contracts through courts and assigned cases to represent defendants. And what we've seen is that this has really been proven to be very ineffective for our clients and for many defendants, especially those who are facing capital punishment. In this system of appointed counsel, attorneys do not have to have any sort of skill set in capital defense to actually represent their client at trial. And so we've seen in the past that there have been tax attorneys and divorce, lawyers who are representing people on death row without having any sort of context or critical understanding for how to represent their client or present mitigating evidence to actually get them the best representation. We've seen in the past that this problem of appointed counsel has really been further complicated by the fact that up until 1999, they were actually capped at a compensation of $1,000. So given the time, the resources, and the energy needed to actually create a compelling case, that cap of $1,000 just further complicated their abilities to actually represent their client effectively. Another issue that we've seen and continue to see today is this issue of racial bias in jury selection. So our population in Alabama is roughly 4.3 million people, and about a quarter of that population is African American. And what we've seen is that in jurisdictions that are predominantly Black, even in Jefferson County, or here in the Black Belt, Jefferson County is where Birmingham is located. And here in the Black Belt is where Montgomery, Alabama is situated. And the Black Belt region of Alabama really is historically an area of our state that really concentrated chattel slavery during the era of enslavement in our history. And so still today, the area of the Black Belt is still predominantly Black and extremely disenfranchised. And what we've seen is that in several court cases, there have been all-white juries that have given the decision for our clients at trial. And we've seen that prosecutors have actually racially removed many Black jurors from serving in juries for reasons that courts have defined as race neutral. So there have been many Black people who were removed from serving in juries because a prosecutor has noted that they're wearing glasses and appeared unintelligent, or they were wearing hoop earrings or had colored hair. Very ambiguous reasons that for all intents and purposes would highlight that this was a racially discriminatory reason for why they saw a need to restrict or remove a juror from serving in this jury. But this is an issue that continues to happen over and over again. It happened during the early founding, and even still today. And a number of attorneys really struggle to try and raise racial bias claims at trial, given the fact that they're not as equipped with knowing how to give a narrative about this and present it in a way that's effective for their client. And so, where we are at the appellate level, we see that a number of the challenges that we have in this stage of the legal process really reverts back to the trial period, when at the time the attorney should have raised these claims of racial bias in jury selection, but did not. Another issue that we see still today is this issue of judicial override practices. And so in 2017, Alabama actually deemed it unconstitutional for a judge to override a jury's verdict to impose their own sentence. Before this time period, judges had the opportunity and the power to actually override jury verdicts to impose their own sentence. And in over 98% of their overrides, a judge overrode a jury's verdict of life to impose a death penalty. And this is further complicated by the fact that in Alabama, all of our judges are elected. Both trial and appellate judges are all elected by the people. And so given high election years and seasons like we've just seen, you can imagine that there was a heightened increase in overrides to impose the death penalty, given the fact that a judge would want to appear tough on crime for their electorate. And so even though this ruling was deemed unconstitutional in 2017, we see that in over 20% of the current incarcerated population in Alabama that are on death row, they're there because a judge overrode a jury verdict to impose the death penalty. And disproportionately, these people who this rule has been applied to, who a judge has, given the capital punishment decision to, are Black and brown people. And this is something that we see, consistently impacting our clients and our work today. So around 1999 was actually when we as an organization actually transitioned into who we are today, which is a nonprofit human rights law firm working to represent the poor, the incarcerated, and condemned in our society. We continue to primarily represent people on death row in Alabama only, but our work has expanded to also include representing children given life without parole within the justice system, as well as challenging inhumane conditions of confinement within our state jails and prisons here in Alabama, which the Justice Department has also characterized as inhumane and cruel. We continue to also support our clients once they've been released from prison through our reentry program, our post-reentry program, which really creates modules and a sort of structure for our clients to actually reacclimate themselves back into society in a way that is sustainable. Our work, really seeks to highlight and examine the ways in which both race and class have not only impacted our clients, but have also informed and shaped the way that we as a society have seen ourselves and our collective identity. In 2008, we actually began our Race and Poverty Initiative with the intention of challenging the way that we as a society think and talk about race and class within our current narrative. Before that time period, we really could not deny the fact that really there was a lack of critical understanding within the courtroom around the way that America's history of racial and economic injustice has characterized and influenced our justice system. And in order for us to be effective in the courtrooms and actually create the type of transformative change that we wanted to see, it was important for us to begin a process of restorative truth-telling across our country in a way that would allow them to tangibly engage with our legal work and our research, but also to find ways to develop community education programs and initiatives across their own sphere of influence with our support and our guidance to actually, I think, open the door for critical understanding and a sort of intentionality to reckon with America's history of racial and economic injustice. And so we are very intentional about situating our legal work and this historical framework that we have developed. And so we began our historical narrative really around five main periods. The era of enslavement in American history, the era of Reconstruction, the era of racial terror lynching in America, the era of the civil rights movement, and today's crisis of mass incarceration. Around these five eras, we believe that there is continuity between each of these periods for how America's legacy of enslavement has influenced and informed the ways in which we see this narrative of racial difference, continue throughout our history. When we think about this era of enslavement and this first era, we are very intentional about talking about the fact that America is a post-genocidal nation. Before chattel slavery, there was a period of genocide in American history where Native people who were first indigenous to this population, to this land, were actually executed and exterminated by European settlers. And there was this narrative of racial difference that deemed these people as savages, as criminal, as inhuman, that legitimized their extermination. And it's through that same lens that we then see the manifestation of chattel slavery in American history and across the American landscape. Despite the fact that we passed the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment, what neither document did was actually remove this myth of racial difference that deemed Blacks as inferior and whites as superior from the landscape. And so by not doing that, we then see this pattern of white supremacy, white superiority and Black inferiority begin to spread across subsequent time periods. We move into this era of Reconstruction, despite the fact between 1865 and 1877, despite the fact that there was tremendous federal legislation that actually supported and attempted to re-enfranchise formerly enslaved Black people in the country. What we also see is that this wave of progress was actually ended prematurely, and that it was done in a way that was not truly effective. We document that during this time period, after emancipation, at least 2,000 Black people across America were actually lynched with impunity by mobs of the hundreds of thousands. And rarely were there any sort of formal documentation or evidence of these acts of violence, these socialized acts of violence across America, actually documented and preserved. There was no intentionality to try and protect the Black communities who were terrorized during this time period. And in jurisdictions and in areas across America where there are functioning court systems and law enforcement agencies, these institutions did nothing to protect the Black people and Black residents in their jurisdiction. From this period, we then, talk about, America's history of racial terror lynching. This was a time period where, lynching in America, racial terror lynching in America actually happened at a heightened rate between the period of 1877 and 1950. During this time period, we document over 4,400 Black people to have been lynched in America, in states both within the American South and states within the former Confederacy, but also in states outside of the South, in states like California. In Kern County, California, we document at least 2 victims of racial terror lynching. In the Midwest, in Omaha, Nebraska, there was a man by the name of Mr. William Brown, who was lynched by a mob of at least 10,000 people in the city center at the courthouse, the grounds of the courthouse lawn, for allegedly assaulting a white woman. At least 25% of lynchings that we see within this period of time are actually due to allegations, even false allegations of Black men assaulting white women. When we look at, you know, the nature and the environment for lynchings, we're very explicit and intentional about talking about the fact that this was almost a carnival-like atmosphere that was created during lynching of an African-American person. When we talk about this period, we define racial terror lynching very, very specifically as being something that's separate and distinct from lynchings in America. We define racial terror lynching as the intentional killing of a Black man, woman, or child at the hands of 3 or more white people, and killing can include hanging, burning, drowning, mutilation, shooting, and a number of different violent acts of torture, with the intentionality of not only terrorizing the victim, but the entire Black community as a whole. It wasn't just enough to terrorize 1 or 2 or 3 Black people. It was then the intention of the mob to then direct its violence towards the entire Black community. And there were several instances and cases where Black communities were completely driven out of the community due to the white mob attacking them and terrorizing them after a lynching had occurred. I'm sure we're all familiar with the Tulsa massacre as an example of this violence and destruction of Black communities. But we also, you know, can name and talk about, you know, Ocoee, Florida, outside of Orange County, Florida, where there was an entire Black community in Ocoee that were driven out of their community following the lynching of Mr. July Perry, who was lynched on November the 2nd, I want to say in 1907, after Election Day, on Election Day, after his fight to vote. We talk about the fact that during this time period, the geographic landscape of America was also shaped and restructured due to the fact that there were tens of thousands, at least 10 million Black people who were actually fleeing the Deep South to relocate to states like California and Nebraska and other areas of the American landscape due to the fact that they were fleeing as refugees from terrorism in the Deep South. When we move into the time period of Jim Crow segregation in America, we then see how then we develop this racial caste system in American society, where we look at how our justice system and public spaces in the American South were restrictive to Black people. You know, many people don't understand the intergenerational trauma that happened within the Black community during this time period when they were denied rights that should have been inherently guaranteed to them. We can't honestly fully talk about the successes of that time period of the civil rights movement without talking about the resistance that Black people were met with during that time period. By not doing so, we believe that we undermine our abilities to actually make connections for how there can be continuing racial disparities today within our education system, our healthcare system, our justice system, because there hasn't ever been a full reckoning about the resistance that happened during that time period. when we look at our criminal justice system today, we see that there is this continuous presumption of guilt and dangerousness assigned to Black people. We continue to see the ways in which this narrative of racial difference continues to characterize Black and brown people in this country, to deem many of us as inhuman and criminal. And you also see how there is this very intentional way that states and our justice system have targeted Black and brown people. America represents roughly 5% of the global population, but roughly 25% of the global incarcerated. And so what does it mean that we have this characterization of ourselves as being exceptional, yet we are the only nation in America, in the world, that still criminalizes and executes children within our criminal justice system. In 2005, there was a young girl by the name of Miss Ashley Jones who actually wrote to us, asking us to represent her due to the fact that she was at one point sentenced to be executed. But due to this ruling in 2005 of the Supreme Court that deemed it unconstitutional to execute children, she now moved into this new category of life without parole, and was up for resentencing hearing. And so we took on her case, and at the time we did an investigation and found there were over 3,000 children across America as young as 13 years old who were sentenced to be executed by the federal government, but now moved into this new life without parole category of resentencing hearings. But we define this category of life without parole still as a death in prison sentence for children. And so between 2005 and 2010, we actually did litigation at the Supreme Court level to actually deem it unconstitutional to give a child life without parole for a non-homicide offense, and also for a homicide offense mandatorily. And so today, judges have the power in their discretion to still give a child a near life sentence for a homicide offense, which we believe is dehumanizing to the child. But today, thankfully, courts can still take into consideration the background and life of the child while also applying that sentence. We believe as an organization that what we memorialize as a society also symbolizes what we as a society value. And so we developed our Community Remembrance Project with the intention of creating actual iconography that symbolizes our commitment to truth telling and our commitment to racial justice, our commitment to ensuring that this history of racial and economic injustice, of socialized violence, of racial violence is not repeated and perpetuated across the American landscape. And so in communities across the country where we document racial terror lynchings to have happened, we also work with communities and coalitions to install and erect historical markers that tell the narrative of Black people in their community who were lynched and terrorized by white mobs with impunity. Those markers also contextualize and talk about this broader history of lynching in America and how this community in, for example, Baltimore, Maryland, is also connected to this broader history across America of racial violence. And so in these communities and within this project, we erect historical markers, but also we collect soil from the approximate location where we believe an African-American person was lynched. And in those spaces, in those areas, those sacred areas, we gather communally and we collect soil and put soil within gallon jars that are then housed within our national soil collection exhibit here in Montgomery, Alabama, within our Legacy Museum from Enslavement to Mass Incarceration. Communities across the country take part in this experience and these initiatives. And my role is to facilitate many of these experiences and opportunities and organize alongside these brave and courageous citizens that are seeking to begin and embark on this new era of truth and justice that we believe that we are entering into right now, post this moment of racial reckoning that we just had in the summer, and now moving forward into, another time period that is unknown and unexpected to us right now, but it's exciting. And we are continuing to develop reports and research and exhibit spaces here in Montgomery, despite the pandemic and despite this precarious moment that we see ourselves in. And our hope is that you all can one day come to Montgomery if you have not already, and visit our sites and engage with our work, and bring it locally to California and to where you all are right now, to bring in more people to challenge the way that they think about these topics and these principles, but also to deconstruct a lot of the types of misguided thoughts that we've had around this history.
Well,
So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, at this point, I think we've gone over time, but we can maybe have a few questions if anybody has them.
Yeah, I have a question if I could, Elliot.
Mhm.
In the Equal Justice Initiative's opinion, what state is the most advanced as far as criminal defense, and conversely, which state is least advanced in the criminal defense procedure?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, really, I'd say there's not one state that we could pinpoint that I think gets a gold standard for how they are structuring their criminal defense practices in their state. I think that definitely California, I think of Colorado as states that have abolished the death penalty in their states, but also have resources and funding that is actually geared towards supporting the most vulnerable and specifically Black and Brown people. But at the same time, I will say that, America is a country that still has yet to, I think, intentionally examine the ways in which the era of enslavement has informed and characterized and influenced every facet of our society. And so in 1976, I want to say, is actually when the Supreme Court ruled in the case of Hussey v. Kemp that racial bias in the implementation of the death penalty is inevitable. And so despite the Supreme Court's ruling, we still continue to see states like Alabama, Georgia, other states across the US enact the death penalty in ways that are racially discriminatory and, really have no basis. And so what does it mean for us as a country that is a post-genocidal nation that has this history of enslavement, history of terrorism towards indigenous people, to still legally allow capital punishment to prevail and persist across our country? In post-genocidal countries like Rwanda or South Africa or even Germany, these countries don't have the death penalty because they have gone through a process of truth and repair work that's necessary to actually understand fundamentally that they themselves cannot trust their decision-making in life and death and whether or not a person should live or die. And so I think given the fact that, we still have the death penalty, you know, in our country, like it's hard to, I think, pinpoint one state as being the best. And in states today that have the highest rates of execution, namely, of course, those states that are in the Deep South, that are the former Confederate states of America, Louisiana, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee. These are also states that had the highest rates of racial terror lynchings during the time period of Reconstruction and also racial terror. And so definitely we see that there is a parallel and a connection between these eras in this history of racial violence and today's crisis of mass incarceration.
Thank you. I have one more question, then I'll shut up and let other people ask questions. You were talking about having jury pools that were representative of the defendant. In California, I think we use driver's license rolls to create jury pools. Is that done nationwide, or is that just a California thing?
Yeah, driver's license are, I can't speak nationwide, but I can say for Alabama specifically, driver's licenses are also used. And it was an issue a couple of years ago because our Secretary of State actually closed a number of DMVs, you know, in rural areas, predominantly Black areas, that actually made it even more difficult in the context of voting to actually, you know, for residents in these areas to actually vote. And so despite, I think, driver's license being used as well for jury selection, it also is being used for voting, of course, but also there's been an intentional way that the state has sought to racially try to exclude a number of Black people from, you know, their right to serve in other capacities.
What would be a more fair way other than driver's licenses?
That's a good question. It's a good question. I'd say,
So
I'm not too sure, actually. It's a good question, though. I have to think about that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I think Gary has a question.
I do.
So do I.
Well, a couple things. So first of all, if rural, you know, it's the same in every other rural America, whether or not it's, you know, brown rural America or white rural America, it's harder to get services. So I mean, if you live in a rural town that's far away from the DMV, it doesn't matter what color you are, it's hard to get a driver's license because you got to go farther. And so it seems to me that making the argument that that we don't have a jury pool available because it's too difficult to get driver's licenses is the same argument that I hear when we can't have voter identification because it's in California because it costs too much for people to get identification. And you know, to me, those are universal issues, not racial issues. Those are universal, you know, poverty issues or transportation issues or availability of services issues, but they don't seem to me to be racial issues. So maybe you can explain what makes it uniquely a racial issue rather than just simply a rural issue rather than, you know, the other way.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Gary. And, you know, I apologize if I tried to, I think, make or suggest that the closing of driver's license offices across the rural South in Alabama was a reason for the removal of Black people serving in juries. Definitely, I think that for me, I would say that it is the closing of these facilities across Alabama and rural Alabama is another, I think, example for how, in many ways, the human rights, the protection of human rights for Black people in this country, in Alabama, are being denied by the state. I think that when you examine the way that the way that race has shaped our nation, whether you're in rural Alabama or in urban areas like New York, I think that we really can't, I think, examine or think of, I think, the removal of these facilities or the lack of access, I think, for resources in these areas, for the right to vote as an issue that's universal. I think that when you think of the countless, the millions of Black people who never got the right to vote in this country, I think that, or even the ones who were lynched or killed on their way to voting, I think that any sort of challenge or obstacle that's put in place for these individuals, Black people in this country, to vote, whether it's the closure of voting areas or centers or driver's license facilities, or even the removal of Black people from even serving in juries. I think that is something that disrupts, I think, our process for getting to true justice. I think that in this country, I think it should be a human right to vote. There should be no obstacles, no barriers to even serving in that capacity as a citizen in the US. I think that
no requirements for citizenship, just a human right. If you're a human, you have the right to vote. That's your thinking. That you don't have to be a citizen of the country. You don't have to live here. You don't have to live in your community. You could live in some other community, just drive to that community and vote. Is that what you're saying? It's a human right. So there's no requirements.
Yes, absolutely. But also there are people who've been incarcerated in this country who still don't have the right to vote. Millions of people who have been incarcerated, predominantly Black and brown people who don't have the right to vote. Okay. There are also people, especially in the South, who are Black and brown, who can't serve in juries. And what does it mean for a person who is given the death penalty, who is Black, who is not represented by a jury of their peers? I think that that's a restriction that that shouldn't ever happen. It shouldn't happen. And I think that as a nation and as a society, we have to create more protections to ensure that we don't have any sort of obstacles or barriers to prevent these opportunities from never happening again, given our history. I think that there are ways that definitely, I think you can see that race is at the center of certain restrictions and obstacles.
Elliot, I think that the Social Justice Initiative, as well as yourself, really ought to be commended for this work that you're doing. This is a challenge, no question about it, and it's particularly for the marginalized. Let me ask you a question. What efforts, or maybe they're advocates, or maybe there are other organizations that the Social Justice Initiative is currently partnering with to do this work, if any?
That's a great question. So we have a number of supporters, a number of people that are in partnership with us from different different departments and areas of our work. So from a litigation standpoint, we work with attorneys and other lawyers across the country representing our clients to support our clients. AT&T, for example, the lawyers of AT&T are actually working pro bono on a number of our death penalty cases right now as well, and supporting us in that capacity. Apart from that corporate support from AT&T, there are a number of other organizations. I think of MoMA, for example, as another institution that's supportive of our work. I think about the Mellon Foundation, as far as giving us support for our Community Remembrance Project efforts and supporting our work in the sphere of racial justice. And, the list can go on.
Sure.
I think that we're very intentional about ensuring that, the work that the product and quality of the work that we put out, it all comes in-house. And so, while we appreciate and definitely acknowledge our supporters universally, I think that definitely, we are really critical about the work that we do and ensure that, that it's done in a way that, it is effective.
I got a question. Hi, Elliot, Steve Lewis here. Quick comment, and then I have a question on your racial terror lynching term. I'm not familiar with that. I hadn't heard it before, but on the voting issue, I agree that it should be a right and we should allow anybody, but the one qualification I'm gonna have to say is that they should be a citizen. And the reason I say that is that citizens have taken an oath to support this country and to be a part of this country. Non-citizens have not, so I'm not so sure on that, but we could spend hours on that. But lynching's horrible in and of itself. I mean, I don't think anybody can question that. But you throw out that term racial terror lynching, is that unique to your organization or has that gone more mainstream?
Yeah, so actually we came up with the definition. And I think through our organization, we've seen in the broader public landscape and narrative on television and most recently, I think on shows, I've seen the word racial terror lynching be used more, in a way that's colloquial. I think that, when we first, began this work, the definition was very important for us because it's important to separate, the lynchings of Black people in this country from the lynchings of other racial and ethnic minorities. I think that given our history of racialized violence and enslavement and racial caste that's been developed within our country due to both of those topics, we really can't equate the weight in which the lynching of Black people are very specific and distinct. And so, definitely I'm grateful for the organization for actually giving me an understanding of racial terror lynchings and how that should be defined. And it's been really cool to kind of see how this definition has been applied and shared and spread across other institutions and just across our society. I hope that answers your question. Do you want me to also define it again, or?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Did you want me to define the question, the definition again, or?
No, when you were talking about it, you defined it. Otherwise, I would have asked you to define it. So
okay.
So it's a term unique to your organization, and it hasn't gone mainstream. Okay.
Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, well, Elliot, we appreciate you coming on. You have a good afternoon. You want to stick around for the rest of the meeting? It's going to be wrapped up pretty quickly. I think Garry is in charge of the meeting now that we got rid of Fred. But thanks again, Elliot. And I promise next time I'm in the South, we'll stop by the National Lynching Memorial. And again, if anybody wants to see the program on it, you can look it up on YouTube. It was on 60 Minutes about 2 years ago. Garry?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hang on a second. Yeah, okay, I am on. Yeah, thank you very much, Elliot. It was very enlightening to hear what the organization's all about and the work that you guys have been doing. So as far as our meeting is concerned, I don't have anything further. Does anybody have any announcements or any comments they'd like to make?
Why did Fred move north?
Why did Fred move north? Well, I guess when we go on to the next meeting next week, you could ask him. I think it had something to do with the flowers that he can raise up there. So I have no idea really. I'm just making that up. So I think he has a calling to go to Oregon, and I think that's where he wants to get closer and closer by going to, which county is he going to? Anybody? Sonoma or something like that?
And you go, the city's Novato?
Oh, Nevada, yeah.
That's, is that Marin County?
Yeah, he's working his way back halfway to Oregon, I think.
Yeah, Marin County.
Right.
Okay, that's it. With that, we'll call it a meeting. The meeting next week, the calendar says it is, that's Mark Elliott with the Student Quarter. And we'll see everybody next week. If we have the board meeting next Tuesday, if anybody wants to attend, I sent the meeting invite out to everybody in the club. Right?
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.